you remember that time that we were like the eighth most listened to
That was good.
UK
I enjoyed
politics
that.
What are we on
podcast?
now?
Do you think we maybe shot ourselves in the foot by not listening to the audience and calling
Well, I
it
wanted to
Rishi
Rishi
business?
Wow, we're clearly in mourning because we've all got
We're all
quite
quite
dark
dark.
clothes on. Yeah.
Okie dokie.
I didn't get the memo.
Hockey-dockey.
Okie
Hockey-dockey. You didn't do it. I did. Hello and welcome to the final episode of the Big Rissue, the podcast where we've been tracking the first 100 days of Rishi Sunak's premiership and seeing how he's got on. And we've now reached 100 days, so goodbye.
Well done.
Congrats,
Round of
everyone.
applause.
Congrats, Rishi.
Yeah.
So
Are we
flawed
clapping
early
ourselves
doors.
or him? I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Either way, I like it. 100 days. Did we
Yeah.
think he was going to make it?
Yeah, I think we were all in agreement. I think
There was a pretty low bar set
It
by
was.
not
Yeah.
making the last one.
he's not the shortest, no matter what happens now.
True.
He's not the shortest serving Prime Minister, and that hasn't been the case for a little while, but it's worth reiterating.
Should we give him a rating out of 10? See how we think the 100 days have gone? Just dive
dear.
straight in.
Dive straight in. Go for it. You go first.
Wow. Ooh.
You
There'll be so
suggested
many
it.
caveats.
I
4.
think a 4.
Five.
yeah,
Middle of the
Is
road.
this versus expectations or like?
Yeah, I
actual
think.
falls? I think I'm going to be 3 or 4. Can I
Okay.
say 3.5? Oh, I'll say 4.
Sure.
I'll say 4.
Sure. Ben,
That'd be
5.
difficult.
You ranked
Yeah,
highest. What do you think of the notable
Massive.
moment?
Jack,
Sunak fan.
you have to come in.
I don't know.
Oh,
I don't know anything.
He hasn't been paying
Pretend you know
attention.
Something.
4.5.
Nice.
Just go dead in the
Wow.
middle. There's a reason I ask the questions. I don't know things. Ben.
Why 5?
Yeah, why 5?
It's difficult because obviously he came after Truss, which set the the bar pretty low. He's had a couple of sort of rebellions and he's had a couple of scandals and things like that, but
Yeah.
nothing that has ever made us really think that he's in jeopardy of being ousted in a similar way. It's only been 100 days. He hasn't done too much yet, but he hasn't messed anything up either. So
True.
straight down the middle.
Okay, so what about you guys? Why do you give it slightly lower? Why 4 rather than 5?
Personally, I think it's difficult because 10 out of 10 for not, for still being Prime Minister. You've got to give him that.
Sure.
However, there's a lot of problems that like strikes still going on. Basically, all the issues that he faced at the start,
All
he
the
still
Rishis.
faces those. Yeah, all the Rishis. He still faces those, and I don't feel like that much progress has been made on those.
Yeah.
But I don't want to give like a 0 or anything because if he'd have just won an election and had his first 100 days, you'd expect a lot more. But
That's true.
he doesn't.
He's
it's
coming with a lot
it's
of
a
baggage.
tough job to come into.
Yeah.
So,
Zach?
yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I'm
That's all
that was quite rude actually.
I was done anyway.
It was clear he was finished.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I think we both, all of us agree that basically it's not as bad as Truss, but it's still not good. And all I'd say, I think 4 might even feel generous in retrospect, but what I would say is that the fundamentals are obviously terrible. He's come in,
Yeah.
the party's very, very unpopular. Economic situation's pretty miserable. He doesn't really have very much time to do anything interesting. You've got 2 years. Most big keynote policies take longer than that to come
So
through.
your 4, is that about the situation more broadly or how he's made it better or worse?
Well, what I'm about to
if
say is that I think he hasn't. I think he's underperformed.
Got it.
He's also
Even
done badly.
irrespective, he's
bad
not done
situation,
enough.
but he's
Got it.
also done badly. And I think that quite a lot of that is that one of his main jobs when he came in was sort of unifying the party, and he's done a pretty crap job of that. And I
Yeah.
think the way he's done a crap job of that is flip-flopping more than he should have done on a whole load of stuff. I think the first flip-flop we had was COP, when he said he wasn't going to go and then eventually went. But that set the tone, and then there was the flip-flopping on onshore winds. There's the flip-flopping housing targets, Braverman. And then similarly, all the scandals, he's been pretty slow to deal with those. Obviously, there's a Harvey one that took him a while. That shouldn't have been in the headlines for as long as it was. It's a similar thing with Dominic Raab, who's still under investigation. That's sort of a simmering issue. And you can see why. The problem is that he doesn't have that many ministers, competent ministers available, and that you can't make too many enemies in the party. But at the same time, it has sort of backfired on him, and it just means that essentially there's no discipline in the party.
Yeah.
And that's made his job pretty tough. So that's why I think, even though he's got crap fundamentals, he's also done badly. So that's why he gets a 4.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. He has done some things, though. I see in front of you, you've each got a bullet point list of things he's done. I don't have the list. So
let's
come
move
amongst
on.
yourselves.
Let's move
I'll go
on.
and grab it. You guys start.
Go on, Ben, what are the things you think he's actually
Should we
done?
wait until Jack, so then we can cut
No,
this?
let's keep going. Let's keep going. He doesn't know anything. Let's just keep going. What do you think he's done?
I think the main things here are the fact that he's had legislative difficulty in this time. So there's a number of things that sort of build into the point you were making, Zach, about the fact he doesn't have any control over the party. And any time there's any hint that there may be his backbenchers voting against a government policy, the government policy changes. So as we've said, onshore wind, planning reform, and online safety as well, the three main ones. He's had to... Oh, hello. He's had to flip-flop on. There's also, as you say, with the scandals, just hasn't been able to get control of that. I think it has just all been defined by the fact that he has no real power, that he has to keep a certain number of ministers in position. He has to try and appease both sides of the party. And he hasn't really been able to make any fundamental changes as a result of that. He's just trying to survive in the job.
Do we have any positives, though?
He's managed to get... I don't know if that's either through or it's just about to go through. Online safety bill has been a really, really long piece of legislation that dates back a number of years that might finally be getting onto the statute book. And there are some problematic clauses with it, but whatever you think of those, there are some good parts to that bill as well.
So the upside is he's got through a piece of legislation with an 80-seat majority. I'm just saying, like, it's a pretty limited upside.
It's a pretty low bar. It's but it's more than Truss managed.
I mean, the first one you got on this is the continuing with military aid to Ukraine, which he almost definitely deserves credit for. Johnson definitely set the tone there, but Sunak has continued. He was obviously pretty quick off the mark with the Challenger tanks. So first big European country, I don't know if we count Poland, to send main battle tanks to Ukraine. But yeah, again, even then, you only give him limited credit because, again, Johnson set the tone, and if anything, that sort of power of inertia would have made him do it anyway. And probably Ben Wallace as well will be partly responsible for all that. That's pretty tough on Sunak, this, isn't it? It's not very nice to him.
It's genuinely hard to think of if you asked him what we should have got him on, but we could have asked him, what is in your first 100 days, what are you most proud of doing? What's your biggest success? I don't actually know what he'd say.
Maybe some credit for stabilising the economy.
I suppose so. Reversing all the
We don't want to go
stuff,
back to talking about gilt yields because it's a bit boring. But he did stabilise the economy in that sense. But again...
But that kind of happened when Jeremy Hunt became Chancellor under Liz Truss.
And actually it was probably the Bank of England. I mean, if you want to... It was an emergency bond buying programme that stabilised that.
Plus, we shouldn't really differentiate. I think Truss was still a Conservative, Sunak's a Conservative. It's the same party in charge. I don't think he gets credit for... The Conservatives should get credit for fixing their own mess, like the whole economic...
We're talking about Sunak, though.
Yeah.
So in his first speech, he promised that the government will have integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level. Trust is earned and I will earn yours, he says. Can we say he's done that?
No. No, not really.
The only thing, actually, now we're thinking of it, the only thing I will give him credit for is he has definitely improved the UK's standing on the international stage. And that's, again, it's not that impressive.
Sure.
But he's definitely better mates with all of the other big leaders than Johnson or Truss were. I mean, one thing that was really, really evident whenever they went to like a multilateral thing was quite how much everyone disliked them. You know, like Macron and Johnson, obviously, they had that whole, I mean, remember when Johnson called it Le Bromance? It's very lispy. But Johnson called it Le Bromance. And then they clearly didn't get on. And it was a similar thing with Biden. But it's clear that Sunak has improved our reputation, at least in the very, very elite diplomatic circles.
Yeah. That's pretty good.
That's pretty good, to be fair. That's non-trivial.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because they just don't... I think that the main thing with him is that he's been trying to survive through this, having seen two of his predecessors toppled. So we made a video about this recently, that he appeared to just not be... Anyway, he wasn't really in Parliament that much. He wasn't really out in the country that much. He was kind of in hiding, trying not to cause any controversy, trying not to, be in the papers that much. So it's kind of difficult to assess what he's done, because for a lot of the time, he I still think as a tactic, deliberately wasn't doing that much.
He has actually, he started doing this PM Connect thing. I don't know if you've seen much of that, where he's going around the country, having little Q&A press conference type things with people in parts of the country, and it's, the fact that no one talks about it or knows it's really happening suggests that like it's not going great, but he's doing it. He's doing something, I suppose. Yeah, but
it's quite sad. This. I mean, in some sense, he is a victim of circumstance, and we shouldn't underplay that. Like he was facing so many problems, and the time frame was so short that it's not enough time to sort that out.
there's been a lot of prime ministers who come into office with difficult situations and they try and stamp their mark on the situation and try and be decisive and lead the country. You know, Thatcher came in following, you know, the winter of discontent and a ton of economic problems. And whatever you think of her as a politician, she did something. She tried to leave her mark on it and tried to steer the country in a certain direction. Sunak isn't doing that. He's not.
But yeah. But that is, you know, we're on year 13 of a Conservative government and he is the 5th Prime Minister in that run.
Yeah.
Like, it's a very different situation to if he just got elected with the majority that he has now.
I think the 2 years thing is the main thing. Is that Thatcher's a good example. Like the structural reforms to the economy and the sort of like basically taking bargaining power away from Labour and moving it towards capital. Like that takes a lot of time, and you only reap the benefits. You know, inflation only started coming down a few years after tenure. You don't really have the time to engage in a full-throated economic reform of the UK economy, which is, I think, what quite a large fraction of the Tory party wants to do. But you know, they want to go for their like growth agenda or cut taxes or deregulate all that sort of shenanigans. But that's a long-term project, and if you only got 2 years at most, then you can't really start embarking on that journey, and that leaves him this whole sort of like limbo where he doesn't have time to do anything interesting, but it's too long for him to be this boring. You know, like you can't actually spend 2 years being like, it's okay, you know, at least we're not in a terrible recession. Like, that's not a strategy. So he's just sort of stuck. But
I do agree.
I don't know.
I completely agree that he's stuck and he doesn't have the time.
Sad.
That he doesn't have the time to do the full structural reform of, say, Thatcher. But even just coming up with some reforms, trying to do something to the UK, because he made that announcement a couple of weeks ago about his 5 points, and then a lot of it was, we'll announce something soon about the specifics of this. I haven't heard any specifics on the 5. In any regard. I mean, the IMF today has come out and said that the UK growth is going to be one of the lowest and even below that of Russia. One of Sunak's 5 points was for the UK to grow.
That is pretty brutal.
Yeah.
So
also, it's such a low bar. Like, not a recession, and we're going to miss that fucking bar. That's terrible.
But this is my point, is that he came in with a difficult situation, but even with that being a difficult situation, he's not really done anything.
I also think there are some things, the strike issue, for example, when he came in, I thought his government might have a slightly different approach to the strikes, and I thought they'd want to resolve them as soon as possible. But it seems to be the complete opposite. They've been the hostility between the government and unions now is much higher than it was, partly because of just the ongoing strikes, but also their legislation for minimum service levels. And you know, so that is just something that's been drawn out over these 100 days. It doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. And to give Liz Truss and her government a tiny bit of credit, in her tiny, 49-day premiership, she ended the barristers' strike. Well, the Justice Secretary did, technically. But, like, you know, that was something. Whereas with this, we've got teachers now striking, fire brigades now striking. There's more strikes happening than there were when Rishi Sunak took over. So things have got worse on that sense.
It's so sad living in a country that's just definitely getting worse. Do you know what I mean? Like, I remember I can't remember who was talking about, there's some people talking about living in America, and they were saying, like, one of the downsides is that, like, sure, you live in the wealthiest country in the world, but, like, you're just going down. I mean, I don't know if that's true for America, but living in the UK at the moment, there is that vibe of just sort of permanent decline.
And kind of across the board too. There's people on all sides of the political aisle who think that it's going down. There's not many people who would say things are getting better. No. Even ideologically, even like cultural war issues, people on both sides are angry and think things are getting worse. And economically, it's undeniable that it's getting worse.
It's at times like this where it's so essential that you have a sort of a unified government that can set a long-term strategy. And the fact that we've had the third Prime Minister in a year it doesn't make the situation any better at all. This is where long-term plans, and I know that I've spoken about this before, but the fact that we wasted all of last year doing nothing, and then we tried to take a radically different turn with Liz Truss to only then waste time again coming back to sort of the mainstream economic ideas. it just didn't help. It just didn't help at
One of the
all.
other things you actually just remind me that's really disappointing me about Sunak is how much he's pandered to the Brexit nonsense. And there's something where I thought he would just take a more sensible line than Truss and Johnson. I thought that basically the clear imperative for sensible economic policy would push him to ditch some of the more ridiculous Brexit myths. But he's just refused to, and he's indulging in this like ridiculous EU repeal law bill, that one where they don't even know how many laws they're going to repeal. They're just going to repeal all of them, see what happens. It's clearly nonsense, and it's not even supported by a majority of the Tory party, but he's too afraid to take them on. And whenever he does those speeches, he always talks in vague terms about like the Brexit freedoms and the free ports and all that sort of shenanigans. That's just another bit that's just disappointing me. I was only going to say, I think we all agree here that basically bad situation, but he's also been crap.
I feel like the 4 I gave him actually feels too high now.
I want to review as well. I also think that he tends to go for the culture war-y stuff as well. So as a tactic to just try and shift the conversation somewhere else and something he's more comfortable with the right scoring points on. So things with like Scotland, the transgender bill. There's also the boats, the small boats. And the fact that one of his five like aims for this year is to increase legislation to stop small boats, despite the fact that they introduced new legislation only last year to do this.
But
it's
Ben,
just another
people's
classic
priorities.
Yeah, of course.
It does feel like one of those things where he's heard like 3 focus groups and of like Tory voters and have been like, migrants, trans stuff, go on then, why not? But he's not even good at it. Like, sure, you can use like polling to inform your policy decisions, but he's crap at it, and he just sort of takes random pot shots in a slightly chaotic manner that makes no one happy, and one of the reasons why his polling is crap. I was going to say, I think we all agree, though, basically.
This is the 100th episode, the final episode. This was meant to be a celebration of everything. And it's been the quietest, saddest episode of any podcast I've even listened to, let alone been involved in.
I'm sorry, that is true. But I think partly we're just also miserable at the moment, living in Britain. I'm normally an optimist about all these sort of things, but I think also doing this podcast on the day that IMF data comes out is pretty miserable. And also the same day, by the way, the corruption index has just come out and we've dropped 10 places and we had the steepest decline, like the 5th steepest decline of any country, which is pretty miserable as well. And it's all to do with like cronyism.
Where are we going? Where's getting better?
Oh, where are we leaving to?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think there's a very good bull case for America. I think America looks pretty good.
I don't want America. Where else can we go?
Where else? What you want to live somewhere else?
Yeah.
Portugal's
got great
the Bahamas?
weather. Bahamas look nice.
Oh yeah, but I mean like somewhere where I can feel optimistic. Somewhere that's getting better, not worse, or at least plateauing.
I do think parts of Europe are probably quite a good bet to go. Okay. I think Germany looks like it's struggling a little bit at the moment.
Sure.
Reason to be wary of its future economic growth. But I could do Southern Europe. I could do Portugal. I could do Spain. I could maybe do Italy.
I mean, Russia's going to grow more this year. And that's true. Than us. Like, we could choose anywhere, and it would have. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not saying we should move to Russia. Just to be clear.
Did you see that advert that the Russian? They released as like a move to Russia advert. Well, they were clearly losing loads of men, actually just whole families because of the war and the mobilisation. And they released a really quite odd video of being like, move to Russia. And some of it was like classic talking points being like, we have cheap gas and we have like sort of dog whistle stuff about like, Orthodox
family
culture, family values, and just sort of like no gays and that sort of thing.
Wasn't that?
And but then one of them was like pretty ladies, and then it was like a little girl running through a field. It wasn't good. Anyway, I was going to say, what do we think? We all agree on this. Either we're talking about where we move to, or what do we think the prognosis is for like the next couple of years for Sunak? Like, do you think has he got any chance of winning when the election happens?
I can't see it happening.
I just can't.
Honestly.
It's not possible.
Yeah.
Surely.
No.
But then I suppose the positive to spin this from is that at least if someone has been rated so low down and they've done such a bad job that we're optimistic that they're not going to get the job again. Yeah. Like that's surely good news.
I suppose.
True. Yeah. We might end up, if some polls are to be believed, we might end up Keir Starmer Prime Minister, SNP as the official opposition,
That would at least be fun.
Crazy.
Let's talk
Like,
about
that
that
would
actually,
be
because
weird.
actually, I think I made this argument before, but I really do think that people are underestimating the chance of that happening. I think especially with the economic news that's coming out. I mean, obviously the IMF forecast we take with a pinch of salt.
Yeah.
But if we really do enter a year-long recession in 2023, Sunak's only selling point, the only thing is competence and like economic stability.
Yeah.
That would be an utter failure.
Yeah.
And I really do think, given he's already on like 25%, he's 20 points behind Labour. If that happens, and then we see inflation continue to kick up, so the latest data suggests that net inflation is going down, but inflation on stuff like food stuff is still going up, and living standards contract even further, then you can really imagine a situation in 2023, 2024 where they get hammered.
I see a lot of discussion on Twitter where people say, is this going to be 1992 or is it going to be 97, in the sense that will the Conservatives have a surprise victory or will it be a Labour landslide? And apparently there's growing thought among the Conservatives that they can pull back a 92 style surprise victory. But a lot of people have also been pointing out that, like, firstly, history doesn't have to repeat itself. It doesn't have to be one of those things or the other. We could be looking at something far bigger than 97 in terms of a Labour win and a Tory collapse. Like, limiting ourselves to a Labour landslide, it could be worse for the Conservatives than
Plus,
that.
two of the main indicators of who's going to win an election are obviously the favourability of the Prime Minister, but also the major policy issues.
Yeah.
So at the minute, the three main policy areas are the economy, health, and asylum and immigration. And Labour lead on all three.
Yeah.
Even things that, the economy is traditionally, you'd maybe expect the Tories to be a little bit, because people would expect Labour maybe not to be as trustworthy, etc. But they're ahead on that. Asylum and immigration as well, which
that's
is
wild.
And the Conservatives have been consistently, really far ahead. That is their issue.
Yeah.
And I know we're still 2 years out from an election, but as you say, as none of us are optimistic about the situation in the next 2 years. If the situation continues in the way that we're expecting it to, I absolutely agree. And just because the Conservatives have always been, it's always been opposition, Labour and Conservatives for the last, 70, 80, 90 years, that doesn't mean that it always has to be. You have partisan realignment. That happens in this country.
Exactly.
The Liberals used to be the opposition party. Labour weren't a party until sort of the 1900s and managed to work their way up. Like, things change around based on how parties do and their viewpoint that the public have of them. And if this continues the way that it is, and the Conservatives' favourability keeps going down, it's absolutely not unheard of that there will be a partisan realignment. That is absolutely a possibility.
I think that any government, any party after 13 or more years in government, it kind of naturally needs to have a period in opposition to kind of find itself again. Sounds very spiritual, but I mean in a kind of political sense.
No, I stage that.
But if the Tories end up with like double-digit seats, or just lose hundreds and hundreds of seats like some people are expecting, do they recover from that, or does a new kind of wing emerge? And because if you end up with that few seats, it is a prime opportunity for half the party to say, actually, let's go our own way and see what we can do.
That would be
what happens after
and
that?
I really think people are underestimating this. And the other thing I'd say is that clearly, you're right, they've been in for 13 years, and when the election rolls around, it's been 15 years. And the thing that everyone clearly wants is a change. And I think what's really interesting is that there's just this asymmetry in how the parties are allowed to offer change. And but basically the Tories can't offer reform because no one trusts them anymore. So when, I don't know, Jeremy Hunt is a good example, or who's the current health secretary? Is it Barclay?
Steve Barclay.
If Steve Barclay starts talking about, as Sunak did actually earlier in the campaign, he started talking about implementing fines for people missing GP appointments, introducing some price signals into the NHS. It's a good way maybe of taking some of the financial pressure off the system, He had to back down very, very quickly because people always see it as a prelude to the sort of US-style privatisation. They think the Tories are trying to do it by stealth, privatise it by stealth. And it's really interesting watching how sort of quiet they have to be about the NHS, despite the fact that the crime space in the NHS is just of epic proportions. I mean, we're entering really terrible positive feedback loops which just make things worse and worse and worse. Doctors are fleeing the system. We can't find more of them because of Brexit. We don't have enough money to pay for new ones. We don't train enough of them. And then... But they can't say anything about it because every time they start talking about reform, everyone goes, you secretly want to hand us over to Big Pharma and turn it into America. Whereas Labour can. Wes Streeting does spend his time going, we need reform. And he took aim at the BMA the other day, with British Medical Association, which is like the union for doctors, and that didn't go down well. But apart from that, most doctors go, yeah, God, Wes Streeting's right. We do need reform. The majority of people who work in the NHS admit that it needs reform, and like what precisely that reform looks like is up for question. But the Tories can't talk about it, whereas Wes Streeting can, and everyone loves when he does.
Yeah.
He gets all those weird front pages on the FT when they're like, Wes Streeting, Labour's new charismatic minister, and you're like, well, yeah, fair enough. But it pays dividends is the point I'm making there.
Yeah.
And I feel like that pattern holds across basically every policy area. The Tories can't really talk about, like, let's say housing. I mean, housing they can't because various internal political disagreements within the party. But people think that they're like the party of the landlords. Whatever the reform is, you're going to try and scupper us. And the Labour can, because they're just more trusted. And it's the same thing now, even with immigration, because Tories can't talk about it, because basically if you're on the left, you go, oh, it's because you hate, you're all racist, and you hate poor people coming from Africa. And if you're on the right, you just go, well, you've said this before, nothing works.
Yeah.
Whereas Labour can offer something, and it might not make everyone happy, but at least there's this like, oh, okay, we're open to this new change. Yeah,
some plausibility there that they just don't have.
And I think that if that asymmetry maintains, that's going to be absolutely destructive for the Tories come 2024. And the absolute last thing I'll say is that you're right about like there are partisan shifts in politics. It does happen, and I think that there's this sort of like there's this idea, this like Copernican thought amongst like British political analysts, which is that because Labour and the Tories have been the main two parties for such a long time, that's all that's going to happen. But again, I always point this out, is that if you just look at Europe, for example, it's proof that being an establishment political party does not protect you from partisan shifts.
No.
So France is a great example. Les Républicains were nearly wiped out, however many, in the last 10 years. They've staged a bit of a comeback, but they still don't have good presidential candidates. The Socialists were actually wiped out. I mean, to the extent they had to sell their Paris headquarters. I mean, that's really embarrassing. You can imagine a Tory situation happening where they get 50 seats, funding dries up, and then all of those like weird, fancy, dinners they do, that sort of thing, just goes. And Italy, all the main parties were completely gone in the mid-90s with the corruption scandal. And I just think it could happen.
Just one thing to add to that as well is that when parties do leave office, and especially after a long period in power, and they have to try and, like, as Rory said, try and find themselves, you tend to see more factionalisation, because there's a lot of frustration about the fact that they're not in power, but the fact that that factionalisation has happened while they're still in power, and they're still dividing themselves. If they do reduce to that number of seats, I would really struggle to see how you would get a party leader to come in to try and get morale up and to try and rebuild them. I mean, after the whole Thatcher Major era, you had like 3 or 4 different leaders in the early 2000s, and which was largely because they couldn't quite find their feet with who they were as a party and what they were going to go with. There was a lot of resentment over that. There was a lot, there wasn't optimism within the party. And if that happens again after the, 13 years it will have been 14 years in power, I really struggle to see how they're going to come back from that, especially with factionalisation already at what it is, because that's only going to increase.
So the last thing I'll say is that that's a really good case in point is the post-Thatcher era, But the other thing is, post-Thatcher era that you could stick together, post-Major, I'm talking.
But post-Major,
is because they had a whole load of big beasts to keep everything together, you know? And they had William Hague, David Davis,
IDS.
And then, IDS. What's that company?
Israeli Defence Force.
They do keep things together, the IDF. Strict discipline there. But the Tory party has been routed of all its talent, and they have no big beasts. I mean, who's that goon who does anti-COVID stuff the whole time?
Andrew Bridgen.
There's a whole load of them.
Yeah, there's honestly too many.
They have no big beasts, no one political capital, no one is going to keep the party together, and that just means that when this happens, I just can't see them having that cohesion that requires.
You're talking specifically of Matt Hancock stepping down, aren't you, about their big beasts leaving?
Exactly. I mean, who is the big beast? Who's the biggest beast?
It's a good question.
Yeah, think about it. It's astonishing.
Yeah.
Who is the biggest beast?
And when you look at the constituencies under threat, like, I don't know who's going to survive the next election.
That's true.
So you could say Penny Mordaunt could be the next leader, but she might not be an MP come the next election.
Yeah. And she's not even a big beast. No one really knew. I mean, we did, but no one knew who she was when she ran. I mean, Charles Walker, that's a long-standing MP.
Yeah.
That's like...
Yeah, but nobody knows who he is.
He's stepping down.
There you go. He's stepping down. Exactly. There you go.
Sajid Javid stepping down.
Yeah.
There's loads of them going.
I mean, understandably.
Nadine
It's a good
Zahar's
time
a criminal.
to get out.
You know. It's shocking. It's wild, and I think people are underestimating it.
Okay, so
I want this all clipped for when we do when 24 happens and we're all right. I want this all on the record.
The only qualification we should make is that the polling suggests that people aren't yet actively interested in Labour.
Yes.
And all I'm saying there is that I mean, a couple of things. One, that's sort of what you'd expect 2 years before an election. You don't want to start jumping out policies because you save them all up for your campaign.
Yeah.
And that could not work. But the other thing I'll say is that I don't know enough about the details here, but people who are closer to this do say that the quality of people coming through the Labour ranks at the moment is a lot higher than it has been. And I'm not really sure why. I'm not sure how the process has improved compared to the Tory one. But I would, if they're correct, basically, I would expect that when we get to campaign time, the quality of policy coming out is pretty good. And I think as long as Labour can offer up basically just any sense of reform, just sort of anything, then people will become attracted to them, and it's not going to be a difficult Tory party to beat.
We'll see.
Yeah.
So we'll obviously come back to this at an election in 24 or whenever it's going to be, but this isn't the final episode, because I think we should do another episode of the Big Rissue in October or whenever it is that you've had a full year. So if you could suggest one thing for Rishi Sunak to do between now and then that would lead to having a more positive outlook on his prospects a year in versus 100 days in, what area should he focus on? I don't need a policy proposal necessarily, just what broadly ought he...
I think the biggest issue at the minute is the economy, so increase growth, reduce inflation. I mean, that's he's come in to fix the economy. He hasn't done that yet. Sort that out.
Sure.
I think these are kind of two but very interconnected. Wages and strikes, like he needs to sort that out.
Sure.
Like if we've still got massive strikes come October, then it's a very bad situation.
Zach?
I'm super not optimistic about the wages and strikes thing. His policy at the moment just seems to be attack the it's a caricature, but attack the unions. But two things I think I'd like to see. One, I know he backed down on it, but housing reform. If you're worried about the economy, so sensible. We need housing reform, and things are getting really quite stupid. And the other thing is stop pandering to like the Brexit nonsense. You can be pro-Brexit and you can believe in deregulating your financial sector or your insurance sector and like certain weird free trade deals, but don't pander to stuff like the Legislative Act or Legislative Appeal Act, where you're just going to ditch a whole load of laws for no good reason.
Okay, there's some advice.
Hire us. Rishi, don't hire us. We've all got
not
jobs.
All of you at one go. I need some of you still.
Yeah. I don't think any of us none of us would accept.
Yeah.
Wow.
Also, I said sort out strikes and wages. I don't know how to do that, but
you don't need to. It's not your job.
That's true.
Well, don't tell him. Then you're giving away advice for free.
True, very true.
What's your email, Rory? Rory at TLDR News.
Or actually tweet me at TLDR Rory.
Oh,
that's
there
probably
we go.
better. Yeah.
So that was the Big Rissue.
Yeah.
It's been 100 days. It's on the whole been less interesting than I think we hoped. Certainly in contrast to trust issues.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's what it was originally called, right? They're too
Trust
similar.
issues, yeah.
Trust issues. There was drama, bombast, excitement. We wanted to make more than 2 episodes a week. Now I'm happy that we're doing an episode every 250 whatever days it is until the next one. Because, as you say, it's been generally kind of negative. There's not been all that much exciting to talk about. He's been in hiding quite a lot.
He has been.
It's been a 4 or 5 out of 10 experience for everyone, I feel.
I did think with 4 people this would be like a fun podcast.
So did I.
Yeah. It's been dark.
We discussed before, because we did the drink episode to celebrate us getting to whatever place we got on the podcast table.
Yeah.
We did an episode where we all had like a couple of drinks, and I'd say that was the most fun I had making an episode, which maybe is telling. But it was a funny episode, I feel.
Was that the Truss era or the Rissue era? Big Rissue.
I don't
era?
remember.
Yeah.
Either way,
that was Truss.
It must have been
It
Truss.
was Truss.
But that was fun, and we said, should we do that again for the 100th episode? I'm glad we didn't, actually, because I thought it would make the exciting mood even more palpable. But instead, I think we'd be in tears.
We'd been sat over our drinks, like we're at a
it would have
bar.
probably been depressing.
Yeah.
Is that what you do at a bar?
All the time.
Yeah.
So
that's why we don't go for drinks anymore.
Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it more than Rishi Sunak has.
More than Jack has.
I've enjoyed elements of it. I just think so. Here's my piece.
I think we should end the podcast early.
No.
There should be like an addendum, an option addendum. Otherwise, people are going to be listening, thinking something
Okay,
informative is happening.
nothing more is happening. You can leave now. Here's my piece. I think I enjoyed the trust issues because it was really interesting. There was a lot to talk about. I felt excited and interested by British politics. And as this series has gone on, less and less has happened and my interest has waned. And I feel like we've had to force some episodes in a way that hasn't felt that fun for anyone. And I think as well, my natural level of interest in some of these topics is lower than all three of you. So when I also know nothing about it, I'm just reading things off a piece of paper and I don't know what value I bring, and that makes me sad.
Oh,
so
very good host.
Yeah.
I don't know if I
host.
believe that, but thank you.
You're welcome.
But I'm excited for the next podcast we do,
Yes.
coming very soon. Ben and I were meant to discuss it earlier, but it's on your to-do list.
Is it?
Can we give any idea of what it might be?
Well, you can actually, if suggestions, if you got anything you'd actually like us to cover. I mean, fair
And
enough,
we're
if you
about to have a
nothing.
meeting about it, so it might be too late, but comment if you'd like.
Yeah, or tweet us.
Tweet us
At TLDR Ben.
You can decipher it from that, I think.
But yeah, I think it will be good. I think I'd recommend obviously making sure you're subscribed here and on the podcast feed, because we'll just rebrand the podcast feed. But also subscribe to TLDR Daily as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Definitely do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing you'd like. I imagine if you like listening to this, there's
Yeah.
more where
Okay.
that came from.
So
What a
I guess we're
tough
done
sell.
now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
it. That's
I think
it.
so.
That's us done.
Well
we did
done,
a whole
everyone.
podcast. We managed to make it through a full 100 days,
Yeah, actually-
unlike what we did with Liz Truss.
No,
which
that
is-
wasn't our fault.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
If we'd
Even
have
with
ended
external
Liz
factors,
Truss's
we've ended
100
it.
days, it would have been a fun ending.
Yes. But we promised
Rishi
to do-
Sunak is actually a 3 out of 10 because he's also ruined our vibe.
Yeah, I now that we've had this
He's
conversation,
upset me
I
personally.
bring him down quite a bit. I think
Yeah.
it's a 2.
Thanks for watching.
Sorry, Rishi.
Bye.
That's it. We're done. 100 days. Anybody else excited for this to die? Hi, Jack.
Wow.
Definitely is.
Yeah.
This is my favourite part of the week.
I'm excited for the new one.
For a rebirth, like
Yeah.
a phoenix out of the ashes.